Good evening. I want to thank you all for coming, and it's important for us to get started now because we have a very limited time frame and a lot of information. So if people out in the hall would come in, it would be great. Please take your seats, and probably most importantly, make sure your cell phones are on silent. Welcome to Holyoke's beautiful senior center. I ask you to be respectful of their rules, and there's no campaigning to be within the building this evening. I'm Helene Florio, and I'm president of the Holyoke Taxpayers Association, and I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's discussion. I need to start with a couple of housekeeping rules. The restrooms are available off to the left as you go back through the doors. Please note that we have cameras. They are running and the sound is all being picked up. Holyoke Media Cable Access is actually providing the taping. We have a couple of volunteers who are running the cameras for them this evening, and this will be presented on Cable Access TV starting within a couple of days. Manning our cameras, we have Carl Eager and John Kelly. Thank you, gentlemen. Over to the left part of the room, Sonia Gonzalez, and Sonia, just wave your hand. Yeah, Sonia Gonzalez is here with a couple of other people for the Chamber of Commerce, and they are willing to help and offer Spanish translations for anyone who would like it this evening. We also have babysitting available upstairs to keep it sort of quiet and away from here if anyone comes in and needs it. In addition to the people that the babysitters tonight are Marlene Curran and Eileen Bresnahan. In addition to those mentioned, we have many volunteers who have spent hours pulling together tonight's information. This is a collaborative event of the Holyoke Taxpayers Association, the Greater Holyoke Chamber of Commerce, and the Government Affairs Committee of the Chamber. And we're focusing on factual information to help you, the voters, answer the question, can Holyoke afford the proposal on the ballot November 5th for the 2 new schools? These groups have but one statement. We are in favor of the City of Holyoke offering the greatest possible education to the students of Holyoke that the city can afford. We're all in this together for the students of Holyoke. We will answer what has to happen for the proposal to pass. Tonight is not the night to change the plan. Tonight is not the night to tell anyone you have a different idea that you want addressed. Tonight is not the night to complain about any design. Tonight is not the night to complain about the rules of vendor engagement or to present passionate statements. Tonight is to learn just how this proposal, if approved, will work and directly affect you. We're offering a brief look at the plan to be followed by factual transparency of where the City of Holyoke stands financially at this moment in time. We are all in this together. Tonight, you must leave your emotions at the door or you will be asked to leave. Tonight is facts, not opinion. When we leave here tonight, you will have not only the information on the how, the what, and the why of the proposed project of 2 new middle schools for Holyoke, but you will also have the information as to the factual costs involved, what a debt exclusion override is, and how the ratepayers of Holyoke, that's you, the taxpayers, will pay for the project. Not only will you have factual information on the finances of the city of Holyoke, you will have current information on the future, so you will know just how you will be affected by the votes, yes or no, on 2 schools for Holyoke. Our format for tonight will be a PowerPoint presentation from Dr. Stephen Schreich, the receiver, and Anthony Soto, Chief of Finance and Operations for the Holyoke Public Schools, immediately followed by another PowerPoint presentation from the Finance Department of the city. The finance team has asked Lori Belanger, our procurement director, to do their presentation. Hold your thoughts throughout all of this as the presentations are made. We will then have plenty of time for Q&A. Small cards have been provided on all the chairs and on the tables, and we ask you to jot down your questions so you'll be ready. At that point, we will have experts up on the stage, each of whom has been involved in the whole process, most from the start to the finish. They are prepared to answer your questions. Q&A will be directed by Holyoke's own attorney, Jay Driscoll, who will be on the floor with a microphone. We will have cues, and people can line up, and he will work with you. At the appropriate time, he will work with you, and at that time, we ask you to line up. Please be ready. There will be we're going to try to do 1 question apiece. This is not a night for point, counterpoint. Anyone who wants to bloviate, I love that word, will be asked to step down. Our last question must be taken no later than 8:20. Following a brief wrap, we will respectfully ask you to all have vacated the building no later than the closing hour of 9 p.m. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Schreich. Wherever you're comfortable. You're welcome to, there's a mic there.
All right, good evening, everybody. I thought I'd signed up for babysitting tonight, but they didn't offer me that position. But thank you all for being here and being willing to engage with this in this very important conversation. I come to this meeting today, and my perspective in this presentation as an educator. I'm a lifelong educator, almost 25 years as a teacher and administrator in public schools, traditional public schools. So that's the perspective I'm bringing to this presentation tonight. So I want to give you a little bit of a background on how we got to where we are and why I believe there is a need for new facilities in the city of Holyoke. So you all have, or they passed out when you came in, a timeline, a much more extensive timeline. But this is a snapshot of where we've how we got to where we are. I just want to point out a couple of things on here. The first is the last time a new building was built in the city of Holyoke was 1989. It was the last time when Dean Technical was built. When I first came to Holyoke, we did an extensive facility review with the help of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and then we hired an independent consultant to help us look at our portfolio of schools. At that time, we amassed that information. We had a number of different community conversations. We had 4 different public meetings. We met with hundreds of different people. We talked to teachers, and we talked to families. And by the winter of 2017, I would also include the school committee was involved in those conversations. City councilors were involved in those conversations. In the winter of 2017, we made a community-based recommendation around having distinct elementary and middle schools. The recommendations we made at the time was to move the system towards pre-K to 5 buildings, middle school, and then distinct high schools to improve the educational experience for students and teachers. We made a recommendation about closing facilities that scored the lowest on the surveys that we had done, the audit we had done, which was Peck, Metcalf, and McMahon School. Our plan also was about equity and and better efficiency of resources. We also, in our proposal, talked about the need to have a preschool center. Holyoke desperately needs more full-day pre-K seats for 4-year-olds, and so we wanted to make sure we could expand access to full-day pre-kindergarten in the city. And we wanted, another recommendation was to have middle schools that were bigger than the ones we currently have now, right, which are tiny middle schools of about 150 students, to where we thought was the sweet spot, about 550 students. Anything approximating 1,000 we thought was overwhelming and would lack the personalization, would cause safety concerns in an urban center like we have in Holyoke. So the recommendation was 2 middle schools of about 550 students. And then we also, in our proposal, wanted to continue to expand the unique programs that parents have demanded from us. The dual language program, they want more STEM programming, they want more innovative pathways, and so we wanted to make sure that we had facilities that accommodated that interest. More spaces for special education students, for English language learners. That came through. And then we wanted to make sure that this district could be financially sustainable for many years to come. And that was the impetus behind the proposal to build two new middle schools. And that was a plan that was endorsed by the building committee at the time. It was also supported by the Massachusetts School Building Authority, who came, visited, met with the community, heard what the community wanted, and they, in what was a move that we did not entirely expect, they liked the plan so much that they supported our two middle school building proposal. And then I'll just point to you that just recently in August 2019, the MSBA approved the grant commitment, which is the amount of money the state is putting towards the project, which was $75.8 million. And just want to point out that reimbursement is among the highest in the state for what we call a core building project, which is a core building project is a new building project, not a renovation or a rehab. So why does Holyoke need 2 new middle schools? The way I've thought about this is in 3 different parts. It's not just, it starts by needing 21st century learning experiences for students to prepare students not only for today, but really for the next 50 years. But it's more than just the new facilities. That's a big part of it. But it's also in responding to what families, parents have told me universally since I've been here, which they want distinct elementary, middle school, and high school experience. The system made a decision, over a decade ago to go to K-8 schools, but it has been clear, and the results demonstrate that has not worked, and the customer feedback has been that they want better for their children. The third reason is around having a much more efficient system. We are running an inefficient school system right now, and we're operationally inefficient around how we use resources. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Around the learning facilities, the schools that came out as the lowest rating, and you can see some of the pictures here, they are not schools I would ever want to put my own child in. Okay, these are schools that lack light. The heating and cooling systems are in very poor operation. There are no cooling systems. The only cooling systems are windows that don't open. Peck School has windows that are screwed solidly shut because they're in such disrepair over time. It is, and heating systems, outdated systems that don't properly circulate air. And when we have a population of students, one of the highest in the state, that has high numbers of students with asthma, that presents huge health challenges for our young people in our schools. And hence, our chronic absentee rates are among the highest in the state of Massachusetts. One of the biggest issues is the issue of the shape of the building. Peck was poorly built from the beginning of its construction. It is an unsafe building with an octagon shape that allows students not to be seen. The sight lines are such that you cannot see a student who's walking around the hallway, in the hallways, which presents huge safety issues in supervision of students. And the building the building itself has a lot of pockets and closets and places that students can hide, disappear, and it creates significant supervision issues for our staff. Additionally, from a safety standpoint, every one of our buildings, except for Dean Technical High School, you can walk right into the building and have access to to classrooms. The way buildings are supposed to be built now, you should have access to the office and not be able to then walk into the rest of the building. The only school is the Dean campus where you are blocked from entering the building. All of our other buildings, you walk in and you have access to where there's kids. And in the world that we live in, that presents significant concerns in our efforts to try to keep our buildings safe from outsiders. Additionally, the buildings, we have classrooms that are way too small for the age range of students that we have. Lawrence School, currently, which at one point served as a middle school, we can't even fit 23 elementary students, let alone middle school students. The classroom spaces we have throughout the district do not accommodate what is a typical size classroom for middle schoolers, which is about 25 to 28 students. We don't have spaces in our building for music, art, for science, for engineering spaces, for what we need today. Many of them have been taken away because we are very crowded in our elementary schools, but also the buildings we're using for middle school were designed as elementary schools. So the spaces were inappropriate 50 years ago when many of them were built for music at the middle school level. They're even more inappropriate today for the type of learning we want to have happen at the middle school level. Also, outdoor space is problematic in many of our schools. We don't have access to green space in a lot of our schools. Many of our neighboring communities have access to turf field space where kids can run around and play sports. We now have a middle school sports program. We do not have access to the types of facilities that this proposed plan would have to allow students to be able to play competitive sports at the middle school level. The future, and what we need for both now and for the next 50 years, is buildings that have the qualities that are listed there. We want to have science, technology, engineering spaces that are much more nimble and flexible for students. Our buildings are very locked in. There isn't places for students to be able to move around. They are not set up to be able to have the flexibility and access to learning that students need to have. Teachers do not have the collaborative spaces that they would require so they can meet together on a regular basis. We also do not have the small classroom settings where we can provide intervention for students. We can provide targeted special education support in many of the buildings that we have now. We would also like to be able to provide things like dance and exercise, which you see a lot of other communities around the state being able to provide their students because they have the requisite facilities to do that. Around having distinct programming, we now have K-8 schools that only have 2 classes per grade, which leads to a lot of problems for us. We are limited by the number of classes that we can offer at each school, and so we often have class sizes that are typically larger than we would like. It also presents problems for teachers to collaborate. We only have 2 teachers at the most in many of our schools because we run such small schools with where there's only 2 fourth grade teachers, there's only 2 fifth grade teachers, which limits the ability for teachers to plan together and have teammates that teach the same thing. We have middle school teachers, special education teachers, and English language teachers that work with English language learners teaching multiple grade levels. Some teaching middle school and elementary school, teaching multiple disciplines, because we're running schools that are inefficient for what the types of services that we need. And then we have very tight building spaces. We're very crowded for what schools need to look like today. We have our elementary schools are very full right now, and like I said before, we have teachers teaching in carts, we have teachers teaching on stages because of the fact that we are using spaces that for classroom instruction that in the past were used for arts and enrichment. The future would be that we would be able to offer 3 to 4 classrooms per grade level, and there'd be clusters. And so students would have the opportunity in middle school to have different teachers for every subject area, which is much more aligned to what the high school level is. We'd be able to have more space for pre-K. We'd be able to have more arts programming, elementary school, and music programming, physical education spaces in schools. And it would allow for us to offer more of the innovative pathways and experiences that our parents have asked us for, like dual language programming, more career technical programming in the future. Finally, around the savings, one of the things building these 2 buildings would allow us to do is run a much more efficient school system. Right now, we have older buildings that are really expensive to operate and to repair. They're much harder to clean, they're much harder to maintain, and obviously there's huge cost implications to that. Peck, as a building itself, it consumes a tremendous amount of heat. It's very costly to run. And then, of course, at this point, we run 11 different buildings as a school system. Given our size, we should only be running 8 buildings. So just the staffing costs that are implied in that are significant. We are running small schools because we just don't have we don't have the scale to be able to offer to be able to consolidate everybody into just a few buildings. So right now, in my opinion, we should have approximately 8 schools, not 11 buildings that we're running. The future would allow us, if we're able to build 2 new buildings, we would save approximately $4.5 to $5 million, which would allow us to reinvest in things that our staff and our families have told us that we desperately need in this system. We need more arts and enrichment programming. We need more interventionists. We need more mental health and social workers. We need better training for teachers. I mean, there's a long list of items that we could reinvest in our schools because we'd be able to save on the operational costs of having fewer buildings, having our students spread out across fewer facilities, and consolidating our elementary, middle school, and high school students together. And with that savings, the district has also committed to reinvesting $1 million back towards the building project. We believe we need to do our part, and we felt like we needed to step forward, and so we made an investment, or we have made a recommendation or proposal to invest $1 million of that savings back into the building project, which you'll hear a little bit more tonight when they discuss the finances. And so I'm just going to wrap up by saying, what happens if we do not build these 2 new middle schools now? We're going to move this system, no matter what, to an elementary, middle school, and high school system. That's what our families want. That's what they've asked for. But in doing so, there's huge liability and there's huge concern about moving into what are subpar facilities that have huge health and safety risks for our children. And we will continue to be a district that's running upside down from a fiscal and efficient standpoint. We're still going to need as many buildings to serve the kids that we serve, and we're going to be forcing children into buildings for middle school that are wholly inappropriate for what middle school needs to look like in 2019. People have asked about the renovating Peck. We studied that extensively. And renovating Peck, to meet the goals that I just outlined and some of the features that we think are necessary, would cost more than $72 million. A renovation, just bringing the building to code, would be about $59 million, but to offer the types of services that I outlined would require an investment of $72 million. It makes it a poor decision to think about renovation rather than a new building. And then if we want to pursue new buildings with the school building authority in the future, we're going to have to restart the whole process again. Okay, this proposal was accepted, was endorsed, was supported, and celebrated by them. If we choose to pass on this opportunity, which certainly is possible, then the grant money that the state has offered will no longer be guaranteed, and then we'll have to go through the application process one more time, which is an extensive process. As you can see, we started this back in 2016, and we're now 3 years later. It would be at least 3 to 4 years to get back into the queue for a new building project. And then just specifically about Peck, and for anybody that questions the conditions of Peck, I think you really need to go see it. You really need to see what that building looks like, and you really have to think about whether that's the kind of place you would want children to be educated in every day. But what we've been told is that the structure, the facility, the construction of the facility is unreinforced masonry block. While it's served us for the last 46 years, it's very expensive to renovate. The building needs to be gutted. The HVAC system, the windows, and safety features are out of code completely. And then obviously every time you go in to renovate a building today, it triggers all kinds of other code requirements that you see there, like sprinklers, abatement, and accessibility, which the school doesn't currently have. So the future of redesign in the Holyoke Public Schools, what I just want to end with is by saying, while this proposal is about 2 new facilities, it's also about the complete redesign of the Holyoke Public Schools. It's more than just the 2 new buildings. It allows us to improve the educational experience for each and every one of the 5,400 students we serve, and allows us to run what I think is a school system that will be much more sustainable and poised to be successful for many years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Schreich. Just give that to Lori. I just want to, I have been asked to mention again that we do have a table over here with people to help with Spanish interpretation if anybody needs it. And they're over here on the far side on the left, so please, if that would be helpful to anyone, please go over and join them at their table. And Lori, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Lori Belanger. I am the Chief Procurement Officer for the city. I'll preface by saying tonight my colleagues and I have gathered as much information on the financial aspect of the proposed 2 middle schools, and we've done our absolute best to kind of present a snapshot of the financial status and where we are at as of this time. Should the vote pass and we build the 2 middle schools, we would be on schedule to pay back in about 3 years. So I want to just preface by saying a lot can happen in 3 years. There's a lot of movement with interest rates and the exact numbers and whatnot. But as we stand here tonight, I feel very confident that we can at least present a pretty solid snapshot of what this looks like financially. Does everyone have a copy of the handout so you can follow? On the second page is a sources of information slide. So tonight, if you have a question and for some reason you're not able to get an answer, there's a lot of information for folks that you can email from the finance team if you have questions concerning the project, as well as the Massachusetts Building Authority. There's a lot of information on the MSBA website as well as the City of Holyoke Public Schools website in terms of how we've gotten here, the processes, the designs, and videos. So there's a tremendous amount of information, and I encourage you to take some time before you vote and to get educated. This is our fiscal year 2020 city budget. It's comprised of three primary buckets. The school department bucket or budget is just over 68 million. I'm going to just round up for ease of talking tonight. General city government is just over 64 million, and included in the overall total is just over $4.8 million of what's called long-term and short-term debt service, also known as bonds. And in case folks don't know what debt service is, it's basically a loan for existing projects that is funded within the general operating budget. So that amount is just over 4.8 million out of a cumulative total of just over 133 million. Next page. Right now, there's several projects that encompasses that $4.8 million number. What is currently being funded is the boilers for the two middle schools. We have the Dean Science Bond, the public service radio projects, the Essex Street house demolition, and the Prue Garage. All of those projects are currently being funded in the general operating budget that includes the $4.8 million. In addition, coming online after the tax rates are set are the bonds for the DPW vehicles, the tennis courts, and that's approximately will add just about $46,000 in addition to the 4.8. Next year, we have three projects coming online. It's the fire department ladder trucks, the traffic lights in the intersection, and actually that year we'll have a reduction in the net debt service because we have roll-offs. Some projects will be paid off, they come off the debt, and interest comes off the debt. 2022, anticipated annual net to the debt service, just over $447,000. That will include the current accelerated school repair project. That's ongoing at Kelly, Morgan, and Sullivan schools, encompasses new windows, doors, miscellaneous upgrades, and HVAC. Pouliot Pool will be part of that project, as well as the school feasibility study. So over the next few fiscal years, we have a lot of projects that are going to come due that will be paid in the operating budget. Real estate values. It is assumed that this year for single-family homes, there'll be approximately a 4 to 5% increase on the values. Right now, the real estate values or the tax rate for commercial is $39.86 per $1,000 of assessed value. And for the residential, $19.29 per $1,000 of assessed value. If you look on this page here for your where it says tax bill, this is where you can kind of do some calculations. You could look at what your value is and kind of look at the current rate, which is the $19 and the $38, kind of if you're a single family, buffer in that 4 to 5%. And that gives you a starting point of what things will look like going forward. So why are we having a debt exclusion vote? As I explained, we're carrying roughly $4.8 million in the general operating budget. This vote would be needed because we cannot sustain an additional $3 to $4 million, which is the projected cost for the schools. So what the override vote will do is it will allow the schools to build, and it will allow the city to finance the schools. The money will go into a separate bucket that will be paid, and you will have that tax assessment. And again, what you want to probably do is go back to the slide showing your tax bill, and it will break down all the different aspects and areas of your tax bill. Right now, the total projected amount for the building of the 2 middle schools is just over $132 million. The MSBA has guaranteed a grant of just over $73 million. The difference is just over $59 million. I want to say that there's been a lot of discussion and conversation around 80% rate and what that means. I will say that anything that is eligible to be reimbursed at the 80% rate from the MSBA, that has been calculated in this project. At the end of the day, when everything is said and done, we're looking at a 55% grant reimbursement from the MSBA. I want to make very clear that there's an additional $2.5 million that's in play that will come back to the district, but we have to go through an application process. The MSBA has to review it, and because they have to go through that process, we can't technically call it a guarantee, but it is in play. Costs. These are conservative estimates on what this will look like financially. This includes the $1 million commitment from the schools and looking at an anticipated tax levy of $54 million. We've got everything broken down in three potential categories: a 20-year bond, a 25-year bond, a 30-year bond. You're looking at your various interest rates, average annual costs, depending on where the city council votes. We're deducting the $1 million from the annual cost. And your residential rates, if you're looking at a 20-year bond, it's an additional 94 cents. On the 25, it's an additional 77 cents. And the 30-year, it's an additional 68 cents. On the commercial side, it's an additional $1.95 on the 20-year bond, $1.60 on the 25-year bond, and $1.40 on the 30-year bond. These figures were given to us from Hilltop Securities. They're our bond counsel. Again, as I said earlier, they're fluid. They can't project future interest rates, additional offsets, or funding sources. We were able to get these numbers just last week, so this is as accurate of a picture as we have to give you. Financial snapshot. If we're going to utilize the 2019 residential and commercial rates, if we have a home that's an average value for a single-family home just over $190,000, if you add the various taxes and the CPA tax and your 3-year potential debt exclusion amounts, you'll see the taxes broken out. You could see for the 20-year bond, it's just over $3,800, 25-year, $3,800, and $3,800. For the commercial, excluding the mall, the average commercial value in the city, excluding the mall, is just over $350,000. First line is the taxes, the CPA tax, and depending on which year or which schedule the city council votes on will give you a ballpark of what things would look like on the commercial side, and this is per year. So for 20 years, it's 688 per year for 20 years. 25 years, it's 564 a year for 25 years, 494 a year for 30 years. Again, keeping in mind that everything is fluid, interest rates, funding sources. This gives you a bit of a snapshot. New growth in the city. Right now, we have several new tax-paying projects coming on the tax rolls, and they include reevaluations of downtown buildings and businesses in the cannabis industry. They are going to be coming online tax-wise shortly. Taxes for the Dunkin' Donuts, People's Bank, and Amazon have yet to be realized, but they're anticipated to come online 2021. So we have some new growth in the pipeline. In addition, what's under consideration is the purchase and sale of the Geriatric Authority and their partnership with Bay State Health, Lynch School, the Geriatric Authority project for condominiums. And recently, 689 Main Street just closed on a purchase and sale. That's a commercial property, and that will be hitting the tax rolls in the next year or so. So last page is considerations. In going through this, you may want to ask yourself, what is the cost not to fund the new schools? I know Dr. Zreich explained everything between Peck and Lawrence. We have maintenance, continued educational challenges, the status of property values, health concerns, and how do we keep up with the other schools that may need maintenance and work? So how does that work? Unlike the CPA tax, there's no exemptions. Economic uncertainty. The Holyoke Mall has adjusted for a period of time their taxes to the city. Sears is offline. It's now a nonprofit. And Pier 1, their lease has not been renewed, and that store is closing in February. So with that being said, will growth outpace closings? Some considerations. Is there a guarantee that increased revenues from new growth raised throughout the life of the debt exclusion override will be dedicated to reducing that amount from the city? Is there a commitment for that? How does the gas moratorium affect prospects for new growth? Something to consider. And water and sewer infrastructure bonds. Will user fees cover the cost of improvements? The sewer department right now has a bond that's been authorized for $8.9 million for the Jackson Street Combined Sewer Overflow Project. And there's another project from Holyoke Water for a UV filtration. The goal is to have user fees pay for those bonds and pay for those projects. But if that doesn't happen, what's the plan? What happens if there's not enough money to offset what the bond amount is? And lastly, cannabis. Cannabis is green, green is money, money is good, right? So what does that look like? I don't think any of us knows. What we do know is Holyoke is the hotbed. We have a lot of businesses. We have a lot of buildings in the city that have been repurposed. We don't know what that means. But we do know it's going to be favorable to the city. It's just going to take time to see that out. So that is something to consider as well. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. We'll go on to questions and answers, right?
Okay, it's going to take us just a couple of minutes to set up. Would Gary Rome and Bennett Walsh please come and move the tables as we had pre-planned? And it'll just take us a couple of minutes. Is there an issue? Oh, she's down with, okay. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, everybody. Before we begin with the actual questions and answers, which will be, for some of you that came in later, we're going to be directed through Attorney Jay Driscoll, and he will be in the front, and we're going to ask people to line up in queues, and we can use both aisles, and he will move back and forth between the aisles to do this. But let me first just introduce the panel, and hopefully, when I put the name tags down, I did it differently than what I had written. But we're going to have, we have Devin Sheehan down at the end, and Devin is chair of the school building committee that has put all of this together. Next to Devin is Margaret Wood, who is the OPM, or the owner's project manager. Thank you. Dory Brooks is next to her, and Dory is the architect from Jones Whitsett. Then we have Anthony Soto, and he is Chief of Finance and Operation in the school departments. We've met Dr. Reich earlier tonight. We have Bill Rogowski, or William Rogowski, next to him, and he's the general manager at the mall. Next to Bill, we have Tony DeLude, who is our assessor. And next to Tony is the new man on the block, Michael Bloomberg, who is the new chief of staff in the mayor's office. Next to Michael is Sandy Smith, our city treasurer, and Lori Belanger, who's the hardest working person I know, and she's the procurement director for the city. So we will have people line and queue up. You can start now. If you can use your cards so you have a pretty good outline to go by when you come up. We have exactly an hour. We have to break at 20 after 8. So let's get as many questions in as we can, and we'll do our best to make sure they're answered appropriately and quickly. Thank you. You're on.
You're on.
Jay Driscoll.
All right. Don't all jump up at once, but why don't you come up to the aisles? My job is very easy. I'm just going to hold the microphone. But because I'm holding the microphone, if you get into arguments or more passionate pleas or whatever, I can also walk away with the microphone. So let's try to keep it to questions and answers. Hopefully we'll get you all the information you want.
Please give us your name for the record.
Mark Lubold, 111 Norwood Terrace here in Holyoke. I just have I'm not sure who to direct it to, but I've seen this blank check out on Facebook that somehow, the cost of this is going to be unlimited. Can someone speak to that?
I think Margaret would. Yeah. Green.
Okay. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a great question. I've also seen the blank check circulating on Facebook, and it's a very legitimate concern because I think people often hear about construction projects that start at one place and end somewhere else. And actually, historically, before the creation of the current school building authority funding, which is what's called the MSBA, there was a prior school building program called the SBA, and there was a history with SBA projects of projects going over budget. And actually, that was the main reason that the state kind of reformed the process. So what's different? What is it now that is protecting the city and the district here and in other communities? So the process of developing the budget for these projects is very, very structured, and it includes a pretty deep dive for in order to develop the cost of the project. And the cost of the project is really in two big parts. So it's the construction cost of the project, and then it's the fees and services and pieces that are, that are the work that has to get done. And then as part of developing the project budget, the overall project budget, which includes those two components, we also develop contingencies to buffer the potential for changes in the project cost. So it's really those three components together, and the job of creating those contingencies rests ultimately with me as the project manager, but it is developed in partnership with the building committee, the architect, the contractor, and the MSBA. So we look, just to give you insight into a single component. So the construction cost, how do you arrive at the construction cost for something like this? So what we did was we hired a design firm that had a really strong reputation for cost performance. We gave them as much time as we could to develop the design. And then we had two separate independent estimates. So there are, in order to develop the estimate, which is the basis of the construction cost, we had both the architect's independent estimator provide an estimate, and then we had the contractor provide an estimate, and then we reconciled those two. And the reconciliation also included the reconciliation of contingencies that were appropriate to the level of design. So it sounds like a lot of gobbledygook, but I want to tell you that what is protecting the community from an increase in the cost is a lot of due diligence and effort that has gone into it at this point. And I certainly understand the concern, but I think what's really interesting is if you look around the Commonwealth at what has happened since the Mass School Building Authority put in place this very structured process for developing project costs, that really has not been a commonality. And memories are long. It wasn't that long ago. The projects that were prior to this process would have been prior to 2004. It's not that long ago. So I understand that people come to this and say, well, I've heard about projects where the cost ballooned. That actually really does not happen at this point because of the structure of the process that we're operating in. And the MSBA is really the bank, right? So if you're going and getting a construction loan from a bank, if anyone ever has, you will know that the bank is really looking to make sure that you are coming to them to borrow the right amount of money. This is the same. The MSBA is the bank. So they are sort of putting us through the paces to ensure that you are protected and that they are protected as the lending institution.
Thank you, Margaret.
Can I add to that a little bit? Just a little bit? No?
I think we're going to try and move on, and maybe you'll get another question in a minute, Tori. We really want to get as many in as we can. I think what Margaret was saying is that it's capped. Yeah, I think that's the simple way of doing it. Yep, you can go ahead. Jay holds the microphone. Yeah, he's in charge, particularly with you.
There's so much to go through here tonight that could be refuted, but I'll just start with one. You can at least have it on. That's all it is. Kevin Jourdain, 18 Raymond Avenue. There's so many different points that could be counterpointed here, but I'm just going to tackle one. I'll start with Dr. Zreich. Dr. Zreich, in recent days, there's this new commitment of $1 million to pay for this. The city has seen other departments make such commitments in the past and have not lived up to them. One, tell us how this. We've heard claims that we're not barely meeting minimum net school spending. How legally can you even make $1 million give back to the city? Two, how is that even legally enforceable? How are you going to prove that it's legally forcible for the 30 years of this bond? And if that's just your personal guarantee, what good is it after you're gone? Thank you.
Green light.
Yeah, first of all, this is not a recent development, Mr. Jourdain. This has been in conversation for multiple months. This is not a recent development of this week. This is work that we've been doing and we continue to do, and I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Soto, who's going to address specifically your question about the permanence of it and the legality around doing this. So I'm going to pass it over to Anthony, who's been doing a lot of work in this area.
Thank you. I recently met with the city solicitor and the mayor's chief of staff, and we went through the details on how we can come up with that million. So as Dr. Zreich presented in his presentation, we are estimating to save $4 to $5 million right now. So once we are realizing those savings, there's a few different mechanisms where we could pass through revolving fund money and also pass through, the city enters into an agreement with the school department to charge them for admin costs. And we could, when we're realizing those savings, what we had discussed was sitting down with the city and revisiting that admin agreement and ensuring that there's enough of an increase that would help contribute to that $100,000. And we would be able to live with that at that point because we are realizing some savings in the budget that, it wouldn't cause us to actually have to make a reduction in staff or cut deep into the budget to pass through to renegotiate that admin agreement. The other thing we talked about is purchasing services that right now we're not paying for or we're not purchasing. One of them being, for example, the legal department services. Not many communities do this, but I know of one community that has done this in the recent past where you enter into what they call service level agreements between the school department and the city, and you agree to pay a certain amount for services rendered, legal being one of them. Those are just a few of the ways that we can get to that million. And once we do, and those will be in writing, there will be contracts signed at the time, and they will live forever after that point.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to have a question?
Just a follow-up to Kevin's question, because he kind of asked my question, but I'm going to ask it a little bit differently because I'd like to get a little bit more creativity because I think there are some very smart people here. So I think...
Can we have your name, please?
Oh, Laureen Reardon,
Thank you.
6A, Arnadale Ave. The receiver has said $4.5 million is going to be the cost realized as a savings. Why has there not been a creative, when you're talking agreement, a creative offer to the taxpayer saying, for 10 years, $4.5 million, we're going to kick that back into our operating costs. So like the city has an operating budget, so doesn't the school department. So when Kevin talked about mechanisms, that was the same thing I thought. Is there something with the grant funding from the state that eliminates the school department doing its due diligence of accounting and of funding its own buildings? Because I am totally concerned about the people who aren't in the room today, who deserve major fire protections. I'm concerned about these new buildings being built that won't be protected because we'll be servicing this debt.
Mike Bloomberg.
All right, hi. So I'm going to try to address that in a few different ways. And one of the follow-ups to Anthony's response to try to make it as easy as possible to understand. Right now, the school department receives services from the city. We can raise the prices of those services, and they will be able to afford those prices as they see the savings from these schools. When we talk about this $4.5 million savings to the school department, that is based on the fact that that's not taking into effect the condition of our schools right now. So when you're saying that they're going to save $4.5 million on their annual budget, well, that's assuming that they were going to never reinvest any money back into their schools, that we're not going to fix the windows at Peck School, that we're not going to fix the HVAC system within our different school departments. And so we are looking at creative ways with the school department and throughout the city, but I just want to address that $4.5 million. And then the third piece to this is just general creative ways in which the city is looking to reduce the cost. And so those of you who are familiar with this project in East Hampton, which came well below budget, they received a certain amount of federal funding and federal grants and nonprofit grants that the city is actively looking at. The city is reviewing all of our existing pilot programs and non-existing pilot programs with nonprofits in the city of Holyoke. We are looking at other mechanisms throughout the city. There's a weekly meeting that is involved at looking at just at this question. And I would invite some of the counselors in the audience, if they'd like to join, they'd be more than welcome to as we come up with these new solutions. You'll be hearing from us in the new year, certainly as we go into next budget season, as to the laundry list of things that the city is doing, because ultimately our job is to give you the best return on investment for your tax dollars, for your time in this city. Our job is to continuously look at that, and that's what we do every day in City Hall.
Is there another question?
Hi, I'm Patty Norris-Lubold, 111 Norwood Terrace. Could someone please, sorry, am I on?
Yeah.
Patty Norris-Lubold, 111 Norwood Terrace in Holyoke. My question is around the debt exclusion, and could someone please share to me, because I understand, and I may be incorrect, but that with debt exclusion, essential city services like fire protection and other essential services are kept out of that debt exclusion bond and kept whole in the budget. Is that correct?
Sandy, do you want to answer that? Okay.
Debt exclusion is added on to the tax levy. So whatever the tax levy base is for this year, say it's in the numbers here, we have 54 million, then your debt exclusion for one of those scenarios would be either the 2.6, it's added on to the tax levy, and then that's divided into the tax rate that the councilors choose.
Well, the short answer is yes, the existing services are protected as part of the city budget, so long as they are approved for by the city council when it comes to budget season. So that money would be separate.
I was going to say, Jay, where'd you go?
I'm right here. Trying to get out of the camera.
Hi, Linda Vakins, 7 Pheasant Drive. So I have 4 different questions. My first one is, what is the total debt of the city right now?
Yeah.
We tend to generally measure our debt service based off our annual cost of debt service versus the total outstanding debt. That's not, but you have my email. I'm happy to get you a final answer on that. I would like to say that if you just saw about two days ago, the city's,
I think
and Sandy, you had an answer, that the city's bond rating has been improved, and the number one reason for that is because of our liquidity and our lack of outstanding debt.
Okay.
But if you want that number, here you go.
Sandy's got it.
So that right now, the total debt inclusion or debt that the city is at, $28,319,550 to be exact. And that's with our multi-purpose bonds for Roberts Field, Dean Science Lab, parking garage, which we had covered in regards to Lori's presentation, That was in 2017. Then in 2018, we added the DPW vehicles. 2019, again, we added the tennis courts, the feasibility study for the accelerated building school repairs. And then we also have, working with the Valley Arena. These are, all of these bonds/bans have been voted, have been presented by the auditor and approved by the city council. Yeah. So at the moment, this is what we're at. New. Which we, in the presentation, Lori did mention something about the sewer. We have an issue with the sewer, and we also have a water bond that needs to be looked into and worked with.
Okay, I've negotiated, Linda,
So-
from 4 questions to 2.
Okay.
So, okay.
But Linda, I just want to, what, 28 million from 2017 to 2020, that's what's going in, that's what has been bonded. These are the projects. I don't have previous. Project, okay, yes.
Yes.
So the 4.8 covers, yeah. Right, but they haven't, yes, yes, those projects as well as the Wisteria Hearst, the Senior Center, and library, these are still on the rolls. They haven't come off.
One more.
I'm just going to make a comment then. If I'm
Well, if there's a question, we got to keep it to questions.
So my question is, so the number that you're sharing with us for the debt exclusion liability that would fall on the city then is more than twice as much as the current total debt for the entire city? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
That's correct.
Correct.
Next question.
You have a person right behind you.
Hi, Ashley Tyler, 67 Sycamore Street. I'm just interested because the numbers that you presented about the bonds today are significantly lower than anything I have seen so far that's been circulating, and I'm wondering how exactly we got to that. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've updated our financials. The last updated financials were from April of last year, where we didn't have final project costs. We were unsure of what to use as interest rates, and there was supposed to be a rough back of the envelope from what we had at the time. So as was mentioned earlier, these updated financials from Hilltop, which is our city's financial advisor for many cities in the state, have brought us in line with what the expected interest rates are and market rates for borrowing based off of the city's borrowing rate, along with the total project cost. And then when you adjust for the million from the school, but I would say that it's about 50-50 what comes off from the school's commitment along with what comes from the interest rate commitment. So those are the 2 major factors. But again, those updated rates, they went out today in a press release. They're here in this presentation. And if anybody has any questions or about them, you're welcome to contact the mayor's office.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mimi Panich, 134 Madison Avenue. And I'm just curious because there's a great deal of uncertainty, obviously, to all of these numbers. We keep hearing about, possible contributions from savings we will find from pilots or projects that we'll know about in the coming year, but we're going to have to vote before the coming year. So these interest rates, are they locked in, and are they going to vary over the term of the loan? And what's the worst case scenario? If the economy tanks and we've bonded for this, what's the city on the hook for if we just can't make up the revenue?
Sure. So the numbers we did present this evening, they don't factor in best case or disaster scenario. In fact, they calculate a baseline scenario, which we in the city would consider a not great scenario. We're expecting 4 to 5% annual economic growth, and our numbers factor in 0 right now based off of what we presented to you. The interest rates, of course, are not locked in. They always fluctuate. They will be locked in at the time that we issue the bond and go to market with the bond. A point to the disaster scenario situations. This is where projects of this magnitude, or really anything within the city, becomes incredibly complex. We had a recession from 2009 to 2011 where property values were hammered around the country, but federal expenditures came in significantly. That is, those are things that we also haven't taken into account here. We don't talk about any potential federal dollars, any potential state dollars. This doesn't include if the government passes a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. We don't feel comfortable making those assertions or exceptions based off of what anybody on the presidential debate stage is saying. This is based just off of what we know today, which is the most accurate interest rate right now and the exact fiscal situation of the city right now. A lot can change in 3 years. We hope for the good based off of current trends.
Mike, I'm going to butt in at this point for a second. I want to ask Sandy if she can pitch in on that same answer. From the experience you have had with the bonds and how stable have the interest amounts been over the years, and carry that forward, because she's been doing this for a long time here in Holyoke.
Not that long, but that's okay. To be honest with you with Mike, I'm going to reiterate what he has said. Yes, it depends on the market value. If right now we're in a good spot, but we're not ready to bond for the project because it's going to take 3 years to complete it. And until we complete the project, we will have to band for whatever the balance is on this and pay interest and interest only. Once the project is completed and we are reviewed by the MSBA and they agree with some of the percentages that they're going to give back to the city, that will be the actual bond that we will take out. It could be, I'm going to lowball it, 50 million. It could be 70 million. It could be at, depending on what the market value is, it could be, would be nice if it was under 3%, but I wouldn't count on that. The highest it could go is 5%. Again, it's like a mortgage on a house. Everybody who owns a home, if you see that the mortgage rate is going down, you go, geez, I'm going to mortgage my house because I want a better interest rate. We can't do that with this bond. We have to accept at the time that we go to bond whatever the interest rate. We cannot shop around. So we have to hope in 3 years that the market is good.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi, Hannah Kennedy, 85 Eastern Promenade. My question is, if the vote does not pass, how will the city pay for all the needed infrastructure repairs as cited in the 2016 school facilities report?
Anthony Soto?
I can't really speak to how the city's going to pay for it. I can speak to how some of the improvements have been made thus far. So, for example, Kelly Morgan and Sullivan just got brand new windows, doors, and that was an accelerated repair project that we had partnered with the MSBA. That the effective rate of that, I think it was about 78%, so it was a lot closer to 80%. But I would hope that the city would take advantage of programs like that. If we kept Lawrence, if we kept Peck, they're going to need new windows. I mean, just to get a sense of what we spent on the 3 schools, that was about a $14 million investment, which was reimbursed at 80% or 78%. So we would probably need to do that with more of our schools if we kept them in the portfolio. The energy that Dr. Dreich talked about, a lot of our buildings are at maximum capacity for electrical. So we released, I think there was a press release a few weeks ago that a lot of our schools actually have air conditioning units, but the ones that don't, the reason is because the electrical infrastructure is not up to code and wouldn't be able to handle adding additional AC units. And if we wanted to get those, we would have to do a significant increase or a significant investment in electrical upgrades, which we would have to, we would make a proposal like we do every year. We submit a 5-year capital plan to the city. It's reviewed. A lot of times there's things on there that aren't approved, but over time, we would hope that things do get approved with the buildings that we do keep online.
I would just add to that. I mean, we've invested in buildings that we expect to keep in our portfolio for a while, which I will tell you are in really rough shape. Kelly, Morgan, and Sullivan were in really tough shape before we put the money in to make the upgrades. But Metcalf, and I've talked about Peck earlier, Metcalf and McMahon are two buildings that need tremendous investment to bring those buildings up to par. There are significant issues in those buildings right now that pose safety issues each and every day, and are a liability for the city of Holyoke. You walk into I just give you a brief snapshot. Metcalf, the floors are so warped walking up and down the stairs. For anybody that's been there recently, it's a safety issue for any able child, but for a student with disabilities, that is a very unsafe building. And again, McMahon School came out as one of the most poorly rated buildings that we had. The amount of work that building needs throughout, it's a full gut of that building if we're going to bring it up to speed. So if we do not get the buildings, I can only imagine the cost of the city over the next 5 years is much higher than the investment that would be made to build the two new middle schools. Because, the portfolio, unfortunately, having not brought a new building in 30 years, has put us into the position that we are in right now.
I do need to correct something Anthony said.
Okay.
So one thing I want to make clear is that the accelerated repair program that's happening in the city in some of the elementary schools is a very specific repair program. The MSBA does not allow you to do a renovation of a building that puts more than 30% of the value of the building into the process. That becomes a core project. So in fact, Stephen also referred to renovations as not a part of the a renovation of greater than 30% of the value of a building. So Peck is worth $3.7 million as assessed value. Any project greater than $1 million is not going to qualify for a green repair or accelerated repair project. Those are window replacement, membrane roof replacement ideas, and those are much more limited in scale. So at Peck, which is a very unique problem in the district, the cost of the electrical system and HVA system, which is 47 years old, the replacement of that alone is greater than that value. And that in and of itself would disqualify it for that program that gets that high reimbursement rate. The core project requires that you go through this exact same process of involving an educator, education design professional, rethinking the district, figuring out how this fits in the long term, hiring 13 separate specialized consultants, going through all of this. When the MSBA looked at the cost difference between charter schools and public schools, the reason why public schools are more expensive is because they take so much longer to produce and because they're built to last 50 years as opposed to just 6 years. So they have a very different standard, and that's part of why the core program is so different than the repair program that happens on smaller projects in the city.
Thank you, Dory. Next.
Hi, my name is Robin Fasoli. I live in Bemis Heights. I left Holyoke about 20 years ago, came back recently, so I'm not up to date with everything that's gone on in the city. But my question concerns the commercial tax rate. I read all the time that we have, if not the highest, I don't pretend to know, but among the highest in the Commonwealth. My concern is if something happens to the Holyoke Mall, now that the stores are closing, thanks to Amazon and online shopping. What does that mean if we lose that off the tax rolls?
Well, first of all, I think Bill Rogowski, can you speak to?
Sure. I want to thank Elaine for having me here. One thing I will say, I will just open my remarks that I'm only here as an expert on one thing, so I'm not going to speak to the commercial tax rate as a whole. I can't speak about anybody else's business but the one I'm involved in. So for us, it's, again, if you look at the nature of what's happening across the country, I mean, we're looking at something coming up now that they're saying in the next couple of years, 20 to 25% of the malls in the United States will close. You know, fortunately right now we're not in that category. We're surrounded by two properties, the Eastfield Mall and the Enfield Mall, that are on the tipping point. So yeah, we're in a very precarious position. That tax rate certainly is not advantageous to us. We are now at a point with the closing of Sears and 3 other junior anchor stores, we have about 20% vacancy. So that affects our cap rate. That affects how we get financing on the street to finance projects, to attract new tenants. So it's at risk. Our rents are going down, and when we negotiate new deals or we negotiate renewals, if it's a $25 deal, it's a $25 deal. The tenant doesn't care if they pay us in rent or they pay us as a pass-through in taxes. So it affects our bottom line. So any increase, we are the highest taxpayer in the city, and if we are not the highest tax rate, commercial tax rate in the state, we will be by far if the debt exclusion goes through.
Thank you. And Tony DeLude, can you pick up on that and say what would happen?
We've adjusted.
I think your mic's not.
Oh yeah, we've adjusted. You know, we've done adjustments in the handouts. You have tax rates and added value for debt exclusion. We already have the CPA rate right now, which is 1.5% on everything above $100,000, commercial and residential. People, you know, took a hit on that, but there are some good projects that come out of CPA, and we're not saying that with the debt exclusion that 2 brand new schools wouldn't be a welcome part of this city. But they do affect your tax rate, and as the commercial rate, it's almost double for every residential rate increase. So, I mean, you go $1.50, commercial, industrial, and personal property would be at a $3 rate for increase. So it flows through the whole city if the debt exclusion were to go through.
And if I could just clarify one more thing. We had been talking to the city prior to all the numbers for the middle schools percolated to the surface. This is not a reaction on our part to get a reval because of the middle school proposals. We were with the city prior to that because of the situation we're in. This only puts us farther back into harm's way with the debt exclusion.
I think it's fair to say that we're very lucky to have a corporate entity that is paying in excess of $8 million, and they have been the highest taxpayer in this community for a long time. They're higher than Mount Tom ever was, and I think it's important that you know, we try to be respectful of the businesses when we make our decisions also. The next on the question.
Hi, Patty Norris-Lubold again. Do you want my address again, or are you good? You good? Okay. So you mentioned early on about the health risks to the students that are in our schools and the teachers in multiple schools. And we also talked about a litigation risk as well. My question is, I'm not sure who to direct this in the city, but if we don't vote for this, How is the city going to protect the taxpayers when we go into litigation or potential class action lawsuit when we don't fund the schools that we need for these health and safety issues?
Yeah, that's a question for the city solicitor's office in terms of how we would respond to a potential future lawsuit. I don't think anybody on this panel can answer that question.
Yeah. We have quite a line of people lined up at this point, so thanks, Mike. I can't answer the question. Next.
Hi, my name is Mike Plaisance. I live at 51 Cherry Hill. My question is for the design team folks and the project manager. Were you guys given a budget when you started this study beyond which your spending could not go? And if not, I'd like to know why not. And did you research the city before you did this? The fact that Holyoke's one of the poorest cities in the state. The belief being, at least on my part, that excellence in education and affordability don't have to be incompatible.
Thank you. Is that you, Dory, or Margaret? Yeah. Okay. We need to have our answers as quick as possible also because of the line. We've only got 20 minutes left.
So, I want to say that both Jones Whitsett and myself work in communities like Holyoke. So my current projects are in Chelsea and in Lawrence. Yours are in
Gardner. We just finished an elementary school in Granby, which actually has the same direct cost per square foot as this project, actually, I noticed.
So, I think the short answer to that part of the question is yes. We are here. We chose to pursue these projects, and we have experience in other communities that have your challenges. I think to the question of whether we were given a budget, I think the short answer is no, because that is not typically the path that we are asked to pursue as part of the MSBA funding. We're asked to work with the community to develop an approach that satisfies the educational challenges. In this case, we looked at one building. We looked at various sizes buildings on different sizes, presented those options to the building committee, and the building committee chose based on the outcome that the two buildings drove to vote to pursue the two-building solution.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I have a brief two-part question.
Name, please.
Lori Marvel, Keefe Avenue. On the $2.5 million projected to be reimbursed to the city by the MSBA, that is not guaranteed, is it, from what I understand?
Correct.
So that, also, has the city council made a commitment before we vote on this of the length, the term of the loan they're going to go for? Is it going to be the 20, 25, or 30 year? Obviously, if it's 20 years, you're going to pay more in your taxes. So is there a commitment tonight on how long the debt exclusion is going to, the duration of that?
I don't believe that there has been a vote at the City Council on that at all. I think any vote on the amount of money and whether this goes through would be after the vote takes place, yes or no.
So the taxpayers would have no really clear idea of how much they're going to be paying yearly until after they vote.
That's correct. That's why we're trying to give you as much information tonight as possible as to how this is going to affect your pocketbook.
Can I just one briefly?
We've got it. That's okay. Yeah. Okay, Mike Sullivan, 43 Park Slope. The first one would be for Mike Bloomberg. Are any efforts being made either by this administration, either at the state or federal level, to get additional grants or funding to reduce the amount that we have to bond for?
Yes, so that's a conversation, and I would actually turn a lot of that over to Representative Vega. So we have continuously worked with our state partners. Something you want to add? So yes, and we will continue to do that. The point that I do want to make to everybody in this room is that those conversations, a lot of the impetus for those conversations is based on the whether we continue to go forward with this project. So we can start those conversations, but a lot of the commitments come with once a project is approved. You're generally not eligible for grants for something that is up in the air. But we will have up to 2 years, possibly even a little bit longer, before any of this hits the tax rolls, before that bond goes out, in order to continue to work on reducing this cost.
And if the city does better over the next couple of years, and we do have more revenues, more money come in than anticipated, is there a prepayment penalty or anything else that would stop us from paying down principal on this bond at a quicker rate?
I don't believe so. No.
Hi, my name's Erin Brunel. I live at 1 Woodland Street, also on the school board. My question is kind of a follow-up for the mall. You mentioned 20% vacancy. I was just wondering if that is taking into account the new coming leases. I hear we're getting a movie theater, Planet Fitness. And then my other question is, has the mall seen an increase in activity since, the new bowling alley opened and all those great new activities that are bringing people to the mall? And thirdly, I'd just like to comment that the mall just got a tax rebate for $600,000, I believe. So are you finding that's going to help improve your financial stability moving forward?
Okay, I'm an old guy, and I might not hit all those points directly, so you might have to ask the ones I miss again. And I've already forgotten most of them.
The first one is your 20% vacancy factoring in the new potential movie theater, and I heard Planet Fitness is coming in. So,
it factors in Planet Fitness. It does not factor in the movie theater, because if we were to do the movie theater, the projected opening would not be till the spring of 2021. So, there's a lot of things that can happen. As we pick up the paper every day, I could be sitting on some vacancy tomorrow that I'm not aware of today. That's just the nature of the business. That's as the property is constituted today, we stand at about 20% vacancy.
And then the second question was, are you seeing an increase in activity and business at the mall since opening the new attractions like the trampoline park and the bowling alley, things that are bringing families back in for activities as opposed to just shopping? Are you seeing that having an impact on the traffic at the mall?
Oh, it is picking up on traffic, but I will tell you, since 2016, and we are still on a downward slide, that our sales are down, and we follow the same curve with our rents are down as well. So we as a company, we're trying the best we can to stay relevant. One of the things I mentioned before is the cap rate. It's not a favorable cap rate for us to acquire financing. It costs money for us to do these deals. So we are certainly in a cash crunch.
And then the last point I made was, did the mall just get a tax abatement for $600,000, and how do you feel that that's going to help, support the mall financially moving forward?
No, it's as Tony just whispered in my ear. It's not an abatement. It's a revaluation. It is not. And again, we try to be a good partner with the city. When we're looking at a 20% vacancy rate, we would argue that what we got was not high enough, but certainly, again, it's a partnership. We do the same thing with our tenants. Some of our tenants come back to us for rent relief, and to be a viable shopping center, we work with them. Will it help? Yes. Does it solve all of our problems? No. Again, I mean, and I'm not going to share dollars and cents with you, but it wouldn't even touch. That won't even touch the investment we had to put in to get Round 1 Entertainment to come into the center. Wouldn't even touch it.
Next.
Thank you. Rebecca Lisi, City Councilor at Large, 25 Reservation Road.
Thanks everyone for being here this evening. I'm really excited about these numbers. I think previously we were looking at the average home in Holyoke experiencing a $240 increase with the debt exclusion override. And instead today what we see as the worst case scenario is about a $180 tax increase.
Is there a question?
There's a question, sure. So the other thing that I see in this presentation tonight is that values are increasing. We've been experiencing new growth, and new growth is expected to grow again to about 4 to 5% in the next year. Or home values, single-family home values are supposed to grow 4 to 5% in the next year. That's good for people. How does that impact the debt exclusion, the amount that we would owe via debt exclusion? Because as far as I understand, it's a fixed number, so even if our property values were to increase, we're not paying more towards debt exclusion every year. Is that a correct understanding?
Three factors that go into, there's three factors that go into the tax rate. You have your budget, the values, and then the tax rate. So depending on what the final budget comes in at and the levies, then that will be considered. It's kind of like a guessing game right now, but when you say 4 to 5% for single-family homes, we were 4 to 5% last year, and we have another 4 to 5% this year. So that's 10% over the last 2 years. Sales this year, which would affect for next year, are also going to be higher for single-family homes. So you have growth on single-family homes. Commercial, industrial is probably steady right now. Our apartments are going to go up this year, also apartment buildings. And hopefully for next year, our commercial and our industrial space on the cannabis industry, they've been reused for all of those. They were dormant buildings. They're being reused for growing factories and selling. So those, the city of Holyoke has found a new use for a dormant side of our industrial base.
Thank you.
The impact on debt exclusion. So you talked about the tax rate, but you didn't talk about the impact on debt exclusion or home value increase.
Just make this quick because we really are on very short time frame.
So the debt exclusion is a fixed amount. If your home values go up, it does not mean that your taxes necessarily go up. The ideal situation is home values go up so we can lower the rates. And that's it. In response also to Bill, we love them all, we thank them all, but what we're looking at as a city is overall property values. If one goes down but others go up, that's what we're looking at. And so right now residential is up, commercial is steady, and industrial is expected to continue to grow.
Next.
Kevin Jourdain, 18 Raymond Avenue. One of the things that we learned this evening is that if this were to be adopted, that means our tax rates will have gone up 18.5% in 2 years. So my question is to you is, how does this administration, I point this question to Mr. Bloomberg, is how do you plan to address and pay for the $60 million of unfunded pension liability? How do you intend to pay for the $20 million additional needed in CSO, the $13 million recently approved water bond, the $300 million in unfunded employee health insurance under the GASB 45 calculation, and also all of the additional capital needs that this community is going to need over this 30-year commitment? Love to hear the administration's position on that. Thank you.
That's exciting, Kevin. We haven't had a chance to meet yet, but I came to this community from Cornell, where I led research with a specific focus on infrastructure data and deferred maintenance liability around the country. So this is very exciting to me. I love GASB 45, GASB 34. I'm happy to work towards answering that question. The truth of the matter is the number one organization that we care about as a city that helps determine whether we're going to be able to borrow money, spend money, etc., are the rating agencies which provide a rating, which do that in-depth research. If you saw 2 days ago, the rating for the city was just improved. Our borrowing rates are going down. Our fiscal situation is strong. The issue of pension liabilities and deferred maintenance is one that exists around the country. I'm not suggesting that it's not a serious issue, but it is not just a Holyoke issue. It's something that our state, it's something that our federal government is working on, and we're working hand in hand with them. We have been lauded and respected by the rating agencies, by the state, and by the federal government because we are doing such a good job of accounting for that deferred maintenance, for addressing that deferred maintenance, and not letting it continue to balloon.
This is going to be, I think, our last question.
I'll make it quick. Dave Yels, 20 Sydney Avenue. My question is, if this were to go forward, who's the authority that would be awarding the construction, the contracts to on the construction?
Please say it again.
Yes. What is the authority that would be awarding contracts on construction if this were to
The
go
authority on who's ordering the contracts.
The city is executing the contracts with the contractors.
Lori, do you want to talk to that?
Executing the contracts. Yeah.
We would go through the normal procurement process for all the construction, trades, et cetera.
Local? Okay. Okay. We have time for one more question. This will be the end.
This question is to the state receiver. You made a comment earlier in your presentation stating that regardless, we're going to 8 schools. When is that going to happen? That was your statement this evening.
No, we cannot go to 8 schools regardless. The statement was we're going to move towards elementary, middle, and high schools. We do not have enough space in our current set of schools to go down to 8 schools. The statement I made earlier was that we're going to move the system to distinct elementary, middle, and high schools.
Part B, because no, you didn't answer my question the first
Okay.
time. When we go to construction, should the taxpayers approve this, we'll be closing those schools. So which 8 schools are we going to?
So we made, way back in 2016, when we made this proposal, we talked about the schools that we'd be taking offline are the schools that scored the worst on the audit review that we conducted, which is Peck, Lawrence, McMahon, Metcalf, and then we did talk about if we could, we wanted to potentially look at McMahon for a pre-K center if we were able to expand pre-K. But the schools we named were Metcalf, McMahon, Peck, and Lawrence as the schools we'd be taking offline.
I've just been told that I'm looking at the wrong clock. The clock on the wall says our time is up, but everybody else's clocks say we've got 4 more minutes, so.
I have a short 4-minute question. Now, if you can talk a little bit about the Construction Manager at Risk program and how that helps to contain costs.
Waiting for the green light. So I'm going to take that because I will be leading that process. So, sorry, I got into the weeds earlier, so I'm trying to avoid not doing it again. The Construction Manager at Risk process is a relatively new procurement process that's been available to municipalities since 2004. It's been extensively utilized by schools around the municipality. It's almost entirely used exclusively by DCAM at this point for state buildings. What it means is that you bring a contractor into the process early and you sign what's called a guaranteed maximum price contract, which is what it sounds like, back to the question that we started with about what is protecting the community against the price going up. So you're executing a construction contract that has a fixed price, and the contractor is given a small contingency to utilize to protect against any sort of unforeseens that come up as the project is bought out. So it's kind of a technical answer, but I would be happy to answer more questions about this. I just don't want to run over here. This process, I'm trying to think, is East Hampton using? It's a pretty commonly used process at this point for utilizing construction, and in this case, Fontaine Brothers has been selected for the Chestnut Street site, and we will be doing a second procurement for the Peck. school site.
Joe, are you in line? I think you're our last questioner.
I'd like to thank the Grand Marshal here for holding the mic for me. The City Council has the mayor's proposed debt, the actual bond itself in our Finance Committee. And we will that'll be the actual final vote for this project. We've worked hard with the schools, we worked hard with the building committee, with the architect, with the developer, and we understand the project fully. What we don't understand, or I hope we don't understand, what is the final number going to be? And I heard that question earlier. The bond is going to be for the whole $133 million. Now you back out the reimbursement by the state. It was the City Council that asked the schools what they could pay towards it, and I thank Dr. Zreik and Anthony Soto for coming up with that $1 million commitment. The MSBA recently took their vote, which is the $59 million, a little bit more, that they've committed to for reimbursing the project. That's 55% of the project. When we got into this, and the rate we want and the rate we need, and none of us will be sitting here asking questions, is 80%. We are a gateway community, the lowest income community in the Commonwealth. We need 80% from the state of Massachusetts. If that comes through, how can we get the state to understand that, and what is being done to get the state to make that 80% real?
Devin?
Thank you, Councilor. So this is something that I think has been near and dear to my heart, not just for Holyoke, but all of the communities that are guaranteed a certain rate, such as 80%. And I mean, communities are guaranteed other rates too, and they never get up to their potential with that. So you've heard one of the restrictions is the MSBA reimburses up to $333 per square foot. That's it on a project when you're talking about that. So that's, if you go over, and I think we're at about 426 or so in one of the buildings, or 476 in one of the buildings. That's one of the differences. But I know personally for Holyoke, I've been originally working very closely with Representative Vega and Senator Humison to see what we can do for Holyoke to increase that, and we've worked closely with the City Council to see how we can get more on that. And the MSBA tells us, and the legislature tells us, because there was not an urge to move and to make a special exception for Holyoke to get the full 80%, is the 80% is what we give you, similar to the high school renovation project that we did that was, we were told we were getting a 90% reimbursement when we did the windows and we did the AC and some of the science labs and that at the high school. Many of you probably remember that just a few years ago. But in turn, the city got back a 66.67% reimbursement back on the high school project because the effective reimbursement rates, because there's restrictions on it of what the MSB is willing to pay for. It's a struggle for all gateway communities, and I think that similar to what we've seen in East Hampton and other communities that have been able to look for different federal dollars, look for different state dollars to pay for different parts of the project. Just today, someone reached out to me and said, have you gone down a certain avenue with this? I know that Representative Vega has met with Congressman Neal's office, I believe, and people have met, members of the City Council have met with the Lieutenant Governor's staff to see what type of relief can be given on this project. But right now, no one here can give you a guarantee that we're going to be able to push up from the 56% or 55% reimbursement, effective reimbursement rate to get that full 80. But I think it's the will of looking for other funding sources to provide that. And I can't rattle off the numbers at all of what East Hampton, I mean, we keep talking about that as a project, but what they changed their advertised additional tax, their debts, the advertised rate when they were going to ballot to what it is now with different federal funding. And I know that either Mike has that or someone has those rates they can get you after. I mean, the hook is coming for me. But 600 to 400 in East Hampton. But I mean, we're trying to find those different funding sources.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Just a couple of more things that our questioning and time is up. I want to thank you for being such a good group of people and making this such a respectful conversation tonight. It was very important for all of us to make sure that happened. Please note there's been a lot of questions and answers here, and if you have questions, We do have on the list, please pick it up if you haven't got it already, copies of the PowerPoint, so you will have the email addresses of the people to contact. I know that we have made every attempt from the collaborative group of the Holyoke Taxpayers, the Chamber of Commerce, and Government Affairs to present this information without opinion, other than Holyoke needs to come together. Now it's your turn. Take the facts that have been presented, study the issues, carefully figure out the impact for you, for the community, and for the students, and please be prepared to show up to vote November 5th on Election Day. It's never been more important for Holyoke. Thank you to all who have joined us to be part of this presentation tonight, the team from the Holyoke Public Schools, the team from City Hall, the architects, the POM, and thank you, Mr. Rogowski, for joining us here to answer questions and sharing information on the effect of the tax increases on business. Thank you all who have worked on this over the last few months from way behind the scenes. As you leave, we have a one-page handout that is out there, will be out there. It's right up here right now. I hope you will, it is in English and Spanish. I hope you will also have been able to take a copy of the PowerPoint presentations. Please be respectful of everyone as you leave and drive carefully. Thank you. Have a good evening. Can you take those things?